Montana Territory, October 1879. The wind carried the first bite of winter through the Bitterroot Valley that evening. But inside the weather-worn Grange Hall, lanterns burned warm and fiddle music rolled like thunder. Folks from all across the valley had come for the harvest dance, boots shining, dresses pressed, hopes high. She stood near the edge of the hall, just to the right of the wood stove, her hands clasped in front of her skirt like a shield. Beatrice Tallen, 23, alone and not by choice. Her parents had passed from fever the winter before, and the ranch, what little was left of it, barely held its own. She had no siblings, no prospects, and no real reason to be at the dance, except that the preacher's wife insisted. "Just go," the woman had said, pressing a ribbon into her hand. "Let yourself be seen." So she wore her mother's blue calico dress and a ribbon in her brown hair, though both were faded now. She stood still, her back straight, her eyes scanning the crowd, but no one asked her to dance. Not until he walked in. The door slammed behind him, drawing every eye. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a dust-worn hat slung low and a trail coat that had seen storms. He looked like the kind of man who kept his word and did not waste it. And he moved like the kind who had seen too much to be easily impressed. Isaiah Granger. He was new to the valley, a cattleman by trade, or so the talk went. Had a small herd and a cabin up near Lost Horse Creek. Folks said he kept to himself. Folks also said he had lost his brother in the war and never quite came back from that. He did not glance around like the other men had. He walked straight over to her, took off his hat, and offered his hand. "Would you dance with me?" he asked. Beatrice blinked. Yes. Yes, I would." His hand was warm, roughened by work. He led her onto the floor before anyone else could move. As the fiddle picked up again, he placed one hand gently at her waist and held her other with quiet care. "You look like you needed rescuing," he said low. Beatrice looked up at him. "From what?" "Loneliness," he said, "and maybe from a long night standing by a wood stove." Her smile came slow, unsure, but it stayed. They moved in time with the music, neither hurried nor stiff. Around them, couples laughed and spun, but for Beatrice, the world had narrowed to the feel of Isaiah's steady hand and the way he watched her, not with pity, but with interest. Real interest. "You from here?" he asked. "Born and raised. My folks had land just west of the ridgeline." "The Tallen place?" She nodded. "I've ridden past it," he said. "Fine view of the valley." "I suppose," she said softly. "Not much left of it now." He did not ask why. He just looked into her eyes like he already understood. The song ended, and another began, but neither of them stepped away. He kept her hand, and she let him. "Would you like to step outside?" he asked. "Get some air." She hesitated, then nodded. Outside, the sky was clear and pocked with stars. The air bit colder than before, but she did not shiver. Not with him beside her. "You do not talk much," she said after a while. "I talk when it matters." "Does this matter?" He looked at her then, really looked. "Yes." She turned to him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. "Why?" "Because I have not seen a woman stand so still and brave in a room full of people hoping someone will notice them. And because I know what it is to be alone in a crowd." She swallowed hard. "You make it sound like I did something noble just by being here." "You did." They stood close now, his coat brushing her sleeve. Her heart beat too fast. She did not know this man, not truly, but he had seen her. Not just the dress or the hair or the quiet look in her eyes, but all of her. And no one had done that in a long time. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "You do not have to say anything." He reached up and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her cheek, and she leaned into the warmth before she could stop herself. "Folks will talk," she said. "Let them." She looked at him, really looked at the deep brown of his eyes, the line of his jaw, the way he stood like he had been carved from the land itself. "Will you come by the ranch sometime?" she asked before fear could stop her. "I will," he said, "but only if you want me to." "I do." He stepped back a little, just enough to give her space. "I will come Sunday," he said. "Bring supper. I make a fine stew." She laughed, a soft sound that surprised them both. "Then I will find a few apples to bake." He touched the brim of his hat. "It is a deal." She watched him walk away, heart thudding in her chest. Inside, the dance went on. Couples spun and flirted and laughed. She could go back in if she wanted. But instead, she stood under the stars, holding the warmth of his hand in hers, and smiled. She had come to the dance alone, but the cowboy had taken her hand before anyone else could. And something told her, deep and quiet, and certain, that everything had just changed. By the time Isaiah reached the Tallen place on Sunday, the sun had leveled just above the western ridge, sliding gold light over the dried grasses and the barn's slanted roof. He rode slow, out of respect more than caution, the pot of stew secured behind his saddle and a folded blanket tied beneath it. The weather had cooled again overnight. He figured she'd be needing warmth more than words. As he dismounted, the screen door creaked open. Beatrice stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her dress was a different one, green this time, and her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, flour dusted along one arm. She watched him with a stillness that didn't speak of nerves, but of someone used to things arriving on time. "You found it," she said. "I did," he replied, holding up the pot. "Hope you're hungry." "I put a pie in before you turned off the road," she said. "It's not burned, so you must ride steady." He set the stew on the porch rail and removed his hat. "You always greet folks with talk of pie and timing." "Only when they come with supper." She smiled, then stepped aside. "Come on in." The house was small, 2 rooms, but clean and well-tended. A fire glowed in the hearth, and the smell of apples and cinnamon hung faint in the air. The table was already set, 2 plates, 2 cups, a small crock of butter between them. She must have known he'd come. "You ever feed a stranger before?" he asked, placing the stew on the stove to keep warm. "No," she said, pouring water from the kettle into 2 mugs. "But you danced with me before anyone else did. That makes you less strange." He leaned against the counter, watching her move. She didn't rush. She didn't fill silence with needless talk. There was a rhythm to the way she worked, like she'd been managing everything on her own long enough to know how to make it passable. When they sat down, he bowed his head without speaking. She did the same. Then they ate, quietly at first, the kind of quiet that wasn't uncomfortable. He noticed how she chewed slow, like she was trying to taste life again. "You always cook like this?" he asked, spooning more stew into his bowl. "I cook what I can," she said. "The apples were from the tree out back. The hens are gone, but I keep flour on hand." "You grinding your own?" "Sometimes. Mr. Callahan lets me use his mill if I bring him dried herbs for his cough." "You trade well." "I have to." He nodded, then took a sip of water. "You mind me asking something?" "Go ahead. What are you holding on for?" She looked up, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you keep this place standing. You didn't sell it, didn't leave. You cook, clean, keep it going. For what?" She set her fork down, wiped her mouth with her napkin. "Because it's mine. And I don't know who I am without it." He didn't press. Instead, he reached for the pie she'd set on the windowsill to cool. "I didn't bring dessert," he said, cutting 2 slices. "But I'll trade you a clean plate for a story." She took the plate he offered and leaned back. "What sort of story?" "Any kind," he said. "One that's true." She stared at the fire for a moment, then said, "When I was a girl, we had a mule named Jasper. Mean-eyed, stubborn, liked to kick the fence when he wanted out. My father couldn't stand him. Said he was more trouble than he was worth. But I liked him. Didn't talk much, just listened. I used to sit on the fence and tell him everything I wasn't supposed to say." Isaiah chuckled. "And did he listen?" "He never walked off." He took a bite of pie. It was warm and not too sweet. "You still talk to animals?" "Not since Jasper." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You ever talk to people? About things that matter?" She met his eyes. "Not often." "Would you start with me?" The question hung between them. Not heavy, just waiting. "I might," she said. "If you're patient." "I am." They cleared the table together. She washed, he dried. When they stepped outside, the wind had picked up and the clouds were gathering low over the mountains. He unrolled the blanket and draped it over her shoulders without asking. She didn't flinch. "You heading back tonight?" she asked. "I'll stay in the north pasture," he said. "Camp under the pines. Ride out at first light." "You could sleep in the barn," she said. "It's dry, and the roof holds." He looked at her. "That a neighbor's offer?" "It's a woman's offer," she said. "To a man who brought supper and listened." He nodded once. "Then I'll take it." She turned toward the door, then paused. "I saved you another slice of pie. For morning. I'll earn it." She smiled without looking back. "We'll see." He watched her disappear inside, then made his way toward the barn. The air smelled of wood smoke and apple peel. He settled in the hayloft, pulled his coat over his chest, and lay still. Somewhere beneath the quiet, a beginning had taken root. And for the first time in years, he let himself believe in something more than survival. A week passed, and Isaiah returned each Sunday without needing to be asked. Beatrice never spoke the invitation aloud, but she set out 2 plates and left the gate unlatched. The understanding between them grew in the spaces where words didn't reach, in the way he carried in firewood without comment, or how she handed him a tin of tea for the ride home, still warm from the stove. On the 3rd Sunday, she met him halfway down the trail, her boots damp from crossing the pasture. He dismounted before she reached him. "You ride early today," she said, brushing her skirts as she paused. "You look like you needed the company earlier than usual." She gave him a look that wasn't quite a smile, but close. "The chimney flue's been sticking. I figured you might know a way through it." Inside, she pulled a chair over and steadied the ladder while he worked. His coat hung on the peg by the door, the sleeves still creased from long wear. She watched his feet balance on the rung, boots worn but well kept, and thought about the steadiness of his presence, not loud, not demanding, just there, like something solid in a world that leaned too easily. When he climbed down, soot dusted his hands and collar. She handed him a cloth before he asked. "You ever think of leaving this place?" he asked, wiping his palms. "No," she said. "I think of making it better." Isaiah folded the cloth and set it aside. "You have plans for it?" "I want to fence the north slope, turn it to pasture. Maybe plant corn next spring if I can get enough seed." He crouched near the hearth, adjusting the draft. "You going to do that alone?" "I've done most things alone," she said, her voice even. He didn't answer right away. When he stood again, he looked at her differently, not with pity or doubt, but like someone turning a coin in his hand, weighing its worth. "I've been thinking about something," he said. She waited. "I've got more land than I need. Some of it's good for grazing, some better for planting. Wasn't sure what to do with it, but I reckon 2 hands work better than 1. She crossed her arms, wary. "You offering me land?" "I'm offering something built together if you'd want that." Beatrice stepped back, her heel catching on the edge of the rug. "You mean to marry me?" "I mean to court you. Proper," he said. "I've seen how you hold your ground. I wouldn't ask unless I meant it." She stared at the floor, her voice quiet. "No one's ever asked me for anything but work. I'm not asking for work. I'm asking for time. A chance." She lifted her chin. "And if I say no? Then I keep coming on Sundays, same as before. I don't aim to take what isn't given." The wind stirred the windows just then, a soft rattle that broke the silence between them. She looked at his hands, broad, lined, steady, and remembered the way he'd held hers at the dance, not like a prize, but like something already known. "My mother used to say nothing good comes without risk," she said. She meant crops and winter stores, mostly, but I think it applies here too. Isaiah waited, letting her choose the next step. "You can court me," she said, "but I won't be wooed with empty talk. You want something built together. You help me mend the barn roof come morning." He gave a slow nod. "I'll bring a hammer." She stepped toward the window, arms still crossed, but her mouth softening at the corners. "You'll need to match shingles first. I'll get here early." She glanced sideways at him, her voice gentler now. "And you best not leave that stew pot behind again. I've grown used to it." "I'll remember." He stepped outside before dusk, the light dimming across the field, long and gold. She watched from the porch until he disappeared into the trees. That night, Beatrice wrote out a supply list by the lantern's glow. Her handwriting leaned right, a habit from years of quick records and ledger notes. She underlined nails twice, then added flour beside it. When she looked up, the room felt fuller than it had in a long time. She'd never been one for dreams, but she knew the shape of a steady hand when she felt it. And Isaiah Granger hadn't let go since the night he first took hers. The morning sky hung close and pale as Isaiah guided his mule across the slope behind Beatrice's barn. The frost hadn't lifted, yet the grass held white at the tips, and his breath clouded the air. He'd brought a wrapped bundle of shingles tied with twine, a hammer tucked into his belt, and a pouch of nails he'd traded for at Nolan's dry goods the day before. Beatrice was already on the roof, crouched near the ridge with her skirts pinned at the knees and her braid tucked into her collar. She glanced over when she heard him, then returned to her work. "You're late," she said. "The sun's barely up. You missed the coffee." He grinned just enough to show he'd heard her, then secured the mule and climbed the ladder without another word. The roof creaked beneath his weight. I started at the south edge, she said, passing him a shingle. That row's near gone. He crouched beside her, steadying himself with one hand on the beam. You always do things halfway before breakfast? I take what daylight gives. They worked in quiet rhythm, hands moving in practiced, unspoken exchange. She held the nails between her fingers. He hammered clean and sure. Her brow was smudged with dust, and her sleeves had come loose from their pins, but she didn't stop to fix them. You ever think about hiring help? He asked, eyes on the wood. I can't pay for what I can do myself. What if someone offered their time for more than pay? She handed him another nail. That sounds like charity. No, it sounds like wanting to be part of something. She paused then, the shingle still in her hand. I'm not used to that, she said. I figured. She passed him the next board and didn't speak again until the ridge was nearly finished. By noon, they'd climbed down and sat in the shade of the barn with 2 tin cups and a loaf of bread she'd sliced at the kitchen table. The air had warmed, but the wind still moved sharp through the dried stalks near the fence line. Isaiah tapped the rim of his cup. I passed a man on my ride and heading east. Said his name was Denny Trafton. Beatrice looked over, mid-sip. He's still here. Was camped by the creek. Asked about old land deeds. She folded the cloth over the bread. He's been sniffing around since summer. My father owed his uncle a debt. Small, but Denny thinks it buys him the whole ridge. You want me to speak to him? No. He won't listen to you. Isaiah studied her face, the way her jaw tightened in thought, not fear. You got proof the debt's been cleared? My father paid it in livestock. I have the ledger, but it's not notarized. Isaiah leaned back against the barn wall, thumb tracing the rim of his cup. Then you'll need someone to witness your claim when it comes up again. She looked at him. You offering? I've read enough contracts to know what counts. If he presses, I'll stand beside you. She nodded once, then stood. There's fencing to mend if you're still offering time. He followed her to the pasture gate, where the posts leaned tired against the weight of years. They worked until the sun dropped below the slope and the light turned that copper color that always made the earth look older, more honest. That evening, Isaiah didn't go straight to the barn. Instead, they sat beneath the porch roof while she stitched a tear in his sleeve where the nail pouch had tugged the seam. You ever thought about building onto the house? He asked. There's a lean-to foundation out back. My father meant it for storage. Could be finished. She tied off the thread and bit the end clean. You planning to stay long enough to help with that? I'm not in the habit of walking away. She handed him the sleeve, finished and neat. Then I suppose we'll see what kind of man you are when the snow comes. He shrugged into the coat, the fabric still warm from her hands. You ever think of what comes after all this? He asked. After what? The mending, the holding on. She looked out toward the ridge, where the sky had gone dark and the stars were beginning to show. I think of waking up without having to brace for what's gone wrong. I think of a house with more laughter in it than silence. He didn't speak for a long moment. I want that too, he said. She stood then, her movements unhurried. There's stew on the stove. You can eat before heading to the barn. He rose slowly. I'll wash my hands. She didn't wait, just stepped inside, the door swinging soft behind her. Isaiah stood alone for a moment longer, watching the lights spill through the window, casting shadows across the porch floor. He had not known what he was looking for when he rode into the valley, but now he'd found steadiness in a woman who never asked for it, and meaning in a place where silence had once outnumbered words. And the way she'd looked at him just now, not soft, not uncertain, but willing, told him he'd been right to take her hand before anyone else could. Snow came early that year. By mid-November, the pasture lay under a pale crust, and the ridge beyond the barn wore a hush that made every sound feel closer. The woodpile Isaiah helped stack beside the porch burned down slower than expected, thanks to the tight seal he'd carved for the door frame. He'd started keeping his bedroll in the barn, then moved it to the lean-to once they cleared space. Neither of them named the change, but it settled between them like something earned. One morning, Beatrice stepped out with Isaiah's coat in her arms. She handed it to him without comment. He slipped it on, and she reached up to adjust the collar, her knuckles brushing his neck. I've been thinking about the seed order, she said. We'll need to choose by month's end if we want spring planting to take. You favoring corn? Corn and beans. Maybe barley, if the creek stays steady. Isaiah bent to check the harness buckles he'd repaired the week before. We'd need more fencing for that. I've got plans drawn. He stood, dusting snow from his gloves. You draw plans often? Only when I mean to follow through. They walked toward the shed where the tools were kept. The snow cracked underfoot. Midway, she stopped. You ever regret not settling sooner? She asked. I regret time wasted. He looked at her, his gaze sure. But I don't regret the path. It led me here. She didn't answer, but her hand brushed his as they reached for the same latch. He let her open the door. Inside, the air held the scent of pine and earth. She knelt to check the spade head. He reached for the twine to bind the last of the broken handles. When she stood, her expression had shifted, less guarded, more deliberate. I had a letter, she said. From Denny Trafton. He's filed a claim against the ridge. Isaiah's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. You going to the hearing? In Missoula, 2 weeks from now. I'll need someone to speak on the ledgers. And someone to stand witness that I've held this land. You'll have both. She nodded. I thought you'd say that. He watched her for a long moment. You afraid? I'm tired, she said. But I'm not afraid. They rode out together the day before the hearing, bundled against the wind. The trail to Missoula was stiff with rime, but they took it slow. At night, they camped near a line of cottonwoods, the fire tucked close to the bank. Beatrice didn't speak much, but when she lay down, she didn't turn away from him. He kept watch, one hand near hers beneath the blanket. The courthouse was plainer than she remembered, boards gray with age, windows streaked with the ghosts of sun. Inside, the room held a cold stillness. The judge asked questions. She answered everyone steady. When Isaiah stood to testify, he spoke without hesitation. His voice carried low and even, and when he handed over the ledgers, he did so with the calm of a man who'd carved truth from harder places. They won. Outside, she didn't speak. Just stood in the snow, looking toward the mountains. He stepped beside her, waiting. I thought it'd feel louder, she said. Sometimes peace is quiet. She turned toward him. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, but her eyes were bright clear, like the first thaw. I want you here, she said. Not just Sundays. Not in the barn or the lean-to. I want you here in the morning, when the stove's barely warm and the coffee's not yet poured. He reached for her hand and did not glance around. I want that too. Every morning. Every quiet thing. She didn't pull back. Then stay. I will. They returned to the ranch 2 days later, the trail shifting under their horses' hooves, the air lighter than before. Snow softened the barn roof and drew long shadows across the slope, but the weight that had hung between them was gone. By spring, the lean-to was finished and joined to the house. Beatrice moved the bedstead into the larger room, and he built her a table wide enough for seed maps and supper both. They planted together. He dug the furrows. She laid the seed. When the beans pushed through the earth, she knelt to touch the leaves, and he watched her with a quiet pride that needed no words. Word spread through the valley that the Tallen place had revived. Folks came by with offers, some for trade, some just to see. She greeted them with the same calm she always had, but now, Isaiah stood beside her. When people spoke his name, they did so with respect. When they spoke hers, it was with something closer to admiration. In late June, they married beneath the cottonwoods near the ridge. The preacher from town read the vows, and the wind moved through the trees like it had come to witness. She wore a cream-colored dress she'd sewn from stored muslin. He wore his trail coat, brushed clean and mended at the cuff. They didn't need a crowd, just the land, the sky, and the hands they'd held through both. That evening, after the borrowed lanterns had burned down and the last neighbor had ridden home, they sat on the porch, her head resting against his shoulder. We built something, she said. He kissed her temple, slow. We did, and it's ours. He nodded, his voice low against her hair. All of it. Inside, the fire burned steady. The room smelled of sage and pine, and the house no longer felt like something held together by memory. It felt lived in. It felt full. They slept that night with the windows open and the world quiet around them. And in the months that followed, the days stretched long and good. The corn rose and even rose. The barley ripened gold. She laughed more. He sang sometimes, soft and off-key while they worked. They argued now and then over seed spacing or when to patch the fence, but always with the promise that morning would come, and they'd keep going. Because they'd chosen each other not out of desperation, but out of a deep and certain knowing. And in that knowing, they built a life not grand, not loud, but solid and true and lasting. Forever began on a quiet Sunday, with a dance. And everything after was earned and shared and tender.